Hello, I'm Pearl Jean Mabe, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Webinars are brought to you as a membership benefit of Heritage Ohio. Today's webinar is today's webinar is on the top 10 underutilized finance tools. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the question box at any time. Most issues with your webinar software will be solved if you close the program and restart it with the link that was sent to you. Our presenter today is Toby Rittner. Mr. Rittner runs the day-to-day operations of the Council of Development Finance Agencies, CDFA, which includes management of a 32-member board of directors and the organization's various educational, advocacy, research, resources, and networking initiatives. Rittner is a frequent speaker at local, state, and national conferences and events focused on economic development finance. He is the author of CDFA's highly acclaimed Practitioner's Guide to Economic Development Finance and an adjunct faculty member at The Ohio State University and Carnegie Mellon University, teaching planning for sustainable economic development. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Toby.
All right, thank you, Pearl Jane, and it's good to have everybody here today with me on the webcast. Bear with me and Pearl Jean as we get through this, because I'm pretty ignorant to technology, and she's been more than gracious in helping me get through this. What you all don't know is that Pearl was a student of mine at Ohio State, and she was in my class that I taught there, and she's cherry picking right now to get me to do this webinar with her and for Heritage Ohio. So happy to do it, and wanted to thank Joyce Barrett and everybody over at Heritage Ohio for inviting me to do this with you today. I'll try to keep this time frame, certainly ask as many questions as you'd like. I'll try my best to answer them. I tried as well as best I could to stay on track with what Pearl and Joyce asked me to do, talk about tools for supporting downtown revitalization. I don't know that I'll have 10 of them, but I'll definitely have a lot of them, and could go into the weeds on a lot more. Real quickly, let me show you on the next slide here my presentation outline. First, I'd like to just tell you one slide about CDFA. Then I'm going to do Development Finance 101. Some of you have probably been in this because I've given this presentation on 101 a lot over the last decade. Do a little bit of landscape map of financing tools, the relationship between finance and development and redevelopment in downtowns, and then emerging innovation and innovative financing tools. Again, I think we're going to do questions at the end. I'm only one man, so I'm also clicking questions and trying to follow along, and I want to give my attention to my remarks. So hold your questions or type them into the questions box, and I'll get to them at the end. So just briefly, let me tell you about CDFA. I know that many of you on this call already know who CDFA is, but for a refresher, we're a 34-year-old national nonprofit trade association that represents the development finance community, both the public and the private sector. We are headquartered here in beautiful and sunny today Columbus, Ohio, but we are a national organization with a footprint in all 50 states and several U.S. territories. We offer 16 different training courses. Most of them we offer online, such as our fundamentals course, which is a soup to nuts on what finance is and how these tools function. Bonds, TIF, tax credits, revolving loan funds, energy, P3, EB5, food systems, seed and venture capital, rural finance, you name it, we have a training course on it. And this year we're going to launch 2 more courses, one on incentives, on administering incentive programs, and the second on water infrastructure finance, how to finance water infrastructure. We have 17 state roundtables. One of those is right here in Ohio. If you've not participated in one of our roundtable events, we hope you'll consider it. Every year around September, we have a conference. We usually do it here in Columbus. Ohio is our biggest one. We have a great day of sessions and discussions and lunches and reception. It's really just a great networking, get to know each other, talk about finance and how we finance the built environment and business and industry in Ohio. Our website has over 8,000 online resources dedicated to development finance. It's the largest resource database of its kind in the world. We offer contract service technical assistance. We've actually done a lot of that in Ohio because of our proximity here. We've done, the Western Reserve Port Authority strategic plan and Summit County Port Authority strategic plan, and we've done a number of other engagements throughout the state. So if you are looking for tailored technical assistance on finance, we'd be happy to consider that as an option as well. We have two important federal contracts as well. One is our U.S. EPA Brownfield Financing Technical Assistance Program. If you've got a brownfield in your community, please bring it to us. We can put it in our marketplace, and we can promote it to dozens and dozens of private sector investment opportunities to see if there's groups that want to get on board on the redevelopment of that brownfield. Same thing for your rural deals. We have a relationship with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to build up a momentum and interest in rural financing transactions, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you're trying to do downtown development or broadband or water or infrastructure or parking garages, there's a big, or healthcare facilities, whatever it might be in rural areas, we have a great conduit for helping your project get financed. Again, I mentioned we're headquartered here in Columbus in the Chase Tower with 15 full-time employees and then 7 part-time employees. I've been the CEO for 11 years. I'm on my 12th year, and we encourage you to get involved in the CDFA and consider joining if you have a chance. So, Finance 101. What is development finance? How do we look at it? Development finance is an effort of a local community to support, encourage, and catalyze expansion through public-private investment in physical development, redevelopment, and/or business and industry. That's an academic definition that we designed for my book. And really, if you look at it, it's the act of contributing to a project or a deal that causes that project or deal to materialize in a manner that benefits the long-term health of the community. So it's different. It's two different terms that we're going to talk about. I don't talk much about funding. Funding is different than finance. And we talk about finance. How do we contribute? How do we cause projects to happen through finance? How do we maximize and leverage dollars and so on? Development finance requires programs and solutions to the challenges that the local environment creates. A lot of you are doing downtown revitalization, hence the fact that you're so engaged in Heritage Ohio. But you have to also look at the root cause. Why is your downtown need revitalized? What happened? What were the causes and what were the outcomes of the way your downtowns got the way that they got? And you can't just throw a generic solution, finance solution onto that problem. You have to come up with something creative. And that means that as an economic developer or as a downtown group, you're the bridge between how government and businesses interact, and you can direct the way these tools are used, whether it's TIF or special assessment or EB5 or whatever it might be. You have an opportunity to take advantage. And then regionally speaking as well, how do you look throughout your region and find other resources that might come in, partnerships, cooperation, advantageous programming? A real example is, how are you partnering with your healthcare institutions, with your universities and your school systems? They need infrastructure, and they finance a lot of that, and that can be part of your downtown revitalization plan. And we've seen examples of that all over the state, all over the country, quite frankly, when you think about partners that could be part of what you're trying to do. So what are some of the terms that you'll hear throughout the day? Debt, equity, credits, liabilities, remediations, guarantees, collateral, early stage capital, short-term and long-term financing incentives, gap financing, etc. At the end of the day, it's a proactive approach. How are you proactive to leverage these very tiny public resources to solve the needs of business, industry, developers, and investors? And with a group like Heritage Ohio and your interest in downtown revitalization in particular, one thing's really important is to know the problem you're trying to solve, but you also need to know whose problem it is. Are you trying to address businesses' needs? Say you're just trying to fill storefronts. Well, focus on what a business needs, not necessarily what you need or what the community needs. Businesses need working capital. It's as simple as that. Maybe you're looking at downtown and you're trying to bring a developer in, and you're saying things like it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it's a return to the historic ways, and that's all great. But developers want to know what the return is. So you've got to make sure your response is one that meets their needs. And we see it far too often that communities don't align what they're trying to do in their development plans with the financing interests of the partners. And this next slide explains it a little bit more. Why do we need development finance? Why is it so important? Because businesses need working capital and the ability to invest in themselves. If we've seen it once, we've seen it a million times. You do a great job of filling a storefront with small businesses, entrepreneurs, but they need a constant attention to capital to buy more inventory. Maybe they sell out and they don't have product and people stop going there. They just need capital. They need ability to continue to cycle through that process. Developers need assistance to achieve an acceptable ROI. ROI is return on investment, and we should not be benign or put our heads in the sand to the fact that developers are wonderful and an integral part of the process that we work with in economic development, but they want a return. First and foremost, they want a financial return, and that's great because so does everybody else. And so we need to make sure that we're allowing them or affording them that opportunity. Communities need infrastructure and amenities. I've seen it hundreds of times. We do these great development projects in cities, and we forget to put infrastructure in. We don't bury broadband. We don't put in the parks and the reciprocal soccer fields and the schools. We can use financing for all of that. You know, we can finance charter schools with a 501c3 bond. Why couldn't you put a charter school in your downtown redevelopment plan? You know, that's a way to use a public financing tool to achieve a community amenity and also get downtown development. It's thinking outside the box. Citizens need opportunities, and downtowns need economic revitalization, and I think there's plenty of opportunity. So who is this nebulous development finance that I speak of? We call them DFAs, Development Finance Agencies, generally speaking, and our name is Council of Development Finance Agencies. So we're a conglomeration of this wide nebulous world of development finance agencies. What do? They're bond issuers, they're community development corporations, they're authorities like port authorities and joint power authorities, airport authorities, transit authorities, stadium authorities, housing authorities, health authorities. They all have the ability to issue debt and do general development finance. Education entities like universities and charter schools and public school systems, counties, cities, corporations, economic development corporations, community development financial institutions, CDFIs, a couple great CDFIs here in Ohio. And then dozens of other examples of finance agencies like air, power, water, and energy authorities, all of which have the ability to raise capital and be invested in infrastructure, whether that be physical or sort of tangential development contributions. You know, what's the market? It's pretty big. There are 55,000 bond issuers in the U.S. You know, the municipal bond market is a $3 trillion plus market. When it comes to securities, you know, these are the second most secure market in the whole wide world. And so bonds are really a bedrock tool of how we do financing, and 55,000 bond issuers. And I can guarantee if you're on this phone right now, I promise you, this is my only promise I'll make of this entire, I'll probably make a couple others, but I absolutely guarantee this one, you have multiple bond issuing authorities in your community or in your state that have the ability to contribute to what you're trying to do in your downtown revitalization. You know, we've been doing bonds for over 100 years, but those aren't the only tools. There's 20,000 revolving loan funds in the U.S. That is a shallow estimate, to be honest with you. We think it's probably more. And in Ohio, we've got hundreds of them. And, you know, these are tools for lending into projects that, or to your small businesses that just aren't utilized enough. EB5 700 regional centers, if I'm correct, I think one of the first regional centers ever was in Worcester, Ohio. And I think it's like one of the first 2 or 3 ever. You know, there's over 600 community development financial institutions nationwide. There's over 35,000 public and private economic development entities. Not all of them do financing, but they all have the ability to get to that capital and find out where it is. So what's the landscape? You know, I just make this funny slide. I'm missing like a dozen things. Every time I do it, I'm like, oh, I could add 5 more things. These are the tools in the toolbox. Most development efforts become very narrow-minded right away, and they say, well, I'm not going to use bonds because how can bonds help me with downtown redevelopment? Well, I could think of about 50 ways they could. Well, we're not going to do tax increment because our community isn't interested in that. Well, that's a short-sighted look at it. We don't want to support micro lending because we want to bring in bigger than just very small businesses, whatever it might be. We don't do special assessments. What is credit enhancement? And tax abatement doesn't apply here, and historic tax credits are, you know, all gobbled up. So we really look at this list, this small list, and say, how are we employing these mechanisms in my community to meet the goals that we're trying to achieve? And if we're trying to attract small businesses to revitalize a downtown district, do we have the right tools in place? Do we have the right relationships in place to attract that capital? And if they come to us and say, I need a loan to revitalize my space and to renovate it and put some housing up above it, are we prepared to get them that capital and find out where it is? And I just gave you about 25 examples right there of ways to think about that and places to look. You know, let's not forget our federal and state partners. There's over 170 federal financing programs for everything you can imagine. Small businesses, redevelopment, rural development, urban development. You know, many of you are going to be in an urban city as defined by the USDA. They have fantastic financing programs. I mean, some of the best in the entire federal government come out of USDA. But I'm willing to bet you're not putting a lot of effort into seeking out those dollars. If I could tell you that you could get a loan for up to 40 years at 2% with very flexible repayment terms to help pay off your redevelopment, you'd say, yeah, I'll take that. Well, that's available right now every day of the week from the USDA through the Community Facilities Loan Program. And it can go to all sorts of things that you want to do in your community related to infrastructure and amenities, which could go into your downtown revitalization plan. And then at the state, our state has a lot of programs, tax credits, some subsidies, tax incentives, and they're open for business through Jobs Ohio and ODSA, and they should be a big part of your efforts. You don't rely on this money, but it is the kind of money that you could go out and supplement what you're trying to do. My screen says we're experiencing audio problems. Pearl Jean, do you think we have any issues?
No, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure before I keep going. All right. So finance and redevelopment. There's a lot of roadblocks to supporting redevelopment. So I put a couple slides together to talk about some of the roadblocks I see. These are probably too generic for the folks on this call because you're more entrenched in it. But what are some of the roadblocks to redevelopment? Credit quality. Borrowers, projects, and your community all have credit quality issues. You may not have credit in some communities, or you might be perceived as not having credit. Your developers might not have credits. Your projects might not be credit worthy. And you've got to find a way around credit quality. And a few ways to do that is to build credit quality or to pay for credit quality, to get credit enhancement to make sure your projects can go to a marketable rate place to get financed. And maybe I just jumped too far in this conversation with you all, but it's completely analogous to buying a house. When you go out to buy a house, the bank bases their decision off of your credit quality. And there are things you can do. A, improve your credit by paying your bills and being a great financially responsible person, or B, buying down your rate through points. Disinvestment, there's a reason you're all on this call, because your communities probably have had a crumbling infrastructure and a stressed workforce and a disinvestment in downtown revitalization. So you're looking for some solutions and some resources on how to make that happen. Environmental challenges, blight is a really tough thing. Site contamination is a really tough thing. When you're looking at small communities that have these old buildings that they're trying to revitalize and save, I think it's awesome. I think it's amazing work. I think it's hard. And then you throw contamination on top of it, like asbestos or lead-based paint, and you just make it even more challenging. And for small places, it's really hard. Costs, let's be honest, redevelopment is really expensive. Outside of maybe brownfield development, it's the most expensive thing we can deal with. And so that's a big factor. Resistance, it's weird. In suburban cities don't have this challenge as much. They're starting to, but in rural or smaller communities, there's resistance from folks who live conservatively, and they like their old downtown, and they don't want a lot of change. And there's resistance to equitable redevelopment because it threatens them. And then you go to cities, and the same challenges exist, but from more of a liberal, and I don't mean this politically, from more of a liberal side of, well, they like the way their city is, and they like the fabric, and they don't want people to be displaced and gentrified. And so you've got the same challenges, but just sort of different ends of the acceptance spectrum. And resistance is a real big issue. I think resistance could probably be put on the top of this to why people don't want to see redevelopment. And then this is really silly, but This is absolutely happening. A rebounding economy is a big risk to redevelopment. You know, you're a community and you're looking at a multi-million-dollar redevelopment of your downtown or revitalization of your downtown.
Toby, I think I can't hear you anymore. To attendees, I apologize. We seem to be having some technical difficulties. Toby, if you want to maybe try to recall in, I can't hear you at all.
Hey, can you all hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right. So everybody, I apologize. That is completely on my end. Our internet just went down in our office because we are actually hosting our own national webinar right now, and we took too much bandwidth. So can you, Pearl, you can hear me?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody.
And
I don't know where I lost you, so I'm just going to go to this to the next slide. You know, how do we address the roadblocks related to redevelopment? I mean, one thing is we look at analytics. What's the cost of doing nothing or supporting sprawl? You know, how can we monetize the savings to support redevelopment? This is really important. You know, there needs
Toby,
to be
you're
some analytics.
Toby, you're one slide behind the current slide.
No, tell me when I catch up. I'm on how do we address these roadblocks? That's what you should have.
I currently have finance and redevelopment, many roadblocks.
All right. Now, so is the first one analytics?
No, I have credit quality at the top.
Oh, I'm on a different slide.
I think it's one behind.
How do I make it catch up?
Go forward one.
No, I am forward one. I'm on that slide.
Try going forward one more and see if it is just showing the last slide.
I did it. Is anything moving there?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh, we love the technology. Now, what do you got?
Still on roadblocks. I can put it on my screen and give you the mouse control and see if that helps. Unfortunately, I don't think that there's a much easier way. You should be able to use your mouse now to proceed in mine.
All right. So let's make sure, because I still have mine up. What do you have on your screen now, Pearl Jean?
I have the presentation up in presentation mode. That should be what you can see as well. It should be on the right slide.
Yeah, I don't have that. I seem to not have connections with you right now.
Okay.
Let me see what I can do here to refresh that. All right. All right, everybody. Have patience with us. Hey, Pro, why don't you give me the screen back again real quick, and then let's see if mine's back up.
Okay. It is on the right slide now.
Okay. How's that, everybody? Better?
Oh, it just went blank.
How's that?
Now I see the GoToWebinar screen. And now I see the PowerPoint with the future slide.
All right. It says, how do we address these roadblocks?
I see the analytics.
All right, that's it. We're on the right spot. Thanks, everybody. Okay, how do we address these roadblocks? You know, we have to use analytics. What's the cost of doing business? How do we not support sprawl? If we decide to not to support sprawl, can we monetize those savings and say that development, redevelopment actually pays off? What is the scope? You know, what are the problems we're trying to solve, and can those problems be solved with a wider scope? One-off programs and one-off projects are really hard to do. It hurts progress. There could be models out there that you could already use. You know, local initiative, wide support. How do we engage the local community, not only support redevelopment, but to also invest in it? And by this, I mean, what are the entities in your community outside of your downtown that might be interested in investing in your downtown because they know that that's an important economic engine for your city? And then leverage. How do we find small money, small dollars to leverage the big dollars? And this is really critical because too many times communities try to solve the big problem. Oh, this is a $10 million project. We got to come up with $10 million. No, you don't. Find sources and uses. Find sources of cash and find out what you really need to come up with. Go to a private developer and say, what would you bring to the table? If they said, we'll bring 50%, then you now only have to find $5 million of financing. So it really is important on that front. What are some new tools that are emerging? I don't know. I think it's kind of silly. New tools, old tools, new tools. There really is some cool stuff happening. And I put bond financing on here, and you're probably all like, how could bond financing be emerging? Well, you know, over the last 5 years, we've just seen some really creative use of bond financing, such as industrial development bonds for manufacturers and supporting their efforts. You know, 501c3 bonds. I mean, you can go to the capital markets for 501c3 bonds. What's a 501c3? It's exactly what you think it is. Hospitals, healthcare institutions, schools, YMCAs, cultural facilities, museums. You know, the Cleveland Museum of Art issued a big 501c3 bond several years ago, and it's been a huge success. YMCAs do it. Thrift, Goodwill stores. These all have the ability to go to the capital markets and issue bonds. I'm willing to bet that virtually no one on this phone has thought about how they could go and attract nonprofits to the center of their city as a client, because nonprofits aren't jobs, nonprofits aren't economic engines. That's just not true. They're big job creators and they're huge economic engines. Just ask the people of Cleveland with the Cleveland Clinic. You know, exempt facility bonds. These are for infrastructure. Could you be putting infrastructure in your downtown and issuing bonds to get it? Infrastructure like broadband and water and sewer and electricity, docks, wharves, mass commuting facilities. You know, things that you might want in your downtown to revitalize it, you could actually be issuing potentially exempt facility bonds. And then obviously TIF revenue bonds backed by special assessment or backed by the increment. You know, 10 years ago, if I would have said you should back your tax increment finance revenue bonds with special assessment, I would have gotten booed out of the room. Today, it's the preferred mechanism. And all you're saying in that scenario is that we're going to issue bonds to support our redevelopment, and we're going to pay it back with the tax increment. But in the event that we don't generate that increment, we're going to assess a special assessment on the property owners to create a reserve fund. We hope to never tap into it, but we might someday. And what that does is it addresses my very first issue, credit quality, and it gives you credit worthiness and a credit worth, you know, a market that values credit. EB5, you know, I'm sure you've all heard about this lucrative and amazing, awesome EB5 program, and it is pretty awesome. It's done well in Ohio, actually, and we have a couple of the best EB5 regional centers in the entire U.S. here, including the Cleveland International Fund, which is, in my opinion, just one of the #1 regional centers in the country. This is a direct investment tool. Encourages foreign wealthy individuals to invest in U.S.-based economic development projects. They can invest up to $500,000 or $1 million, just depending on whether it's a targeted investment area. They have to create 10 permanent jobs. People go through what's called a regional center. Instead of you trying to raise the money, you go through a regional center which raises the money, and they become your partner. I bet if you called Steve Sternisha right now at the Cleveland International Fund, he would be your partner and help you work on potentially raising capital for your projects. I just noticed my slide is outdated. It did not expire on the 11th. Congress did renew it for another fiscal year. So the battle will start up again, excuse me, next year for permanent renewal of this. So you say, Toby, I've heard about this EB5. Well, what kind of projects? Hotels. The first new hotel in the Pearl District of Portland, Oregon was completed using EB5. Maybe you don't know or do know about Portland, Oregon, but the Pearl District is one of the areas of Portland has seen the disproportionate lack of investment. Well, to make it catalyze this effort, they got this hotel done there using EB5, and this is a downtown part of Portland. Revitalization, the East Bank Flats project in downtown Cleveland, Ohio, was financed with EB5. I also believe they did University Circle, some of that redevelopment there. Small business loan funds. You could raise capital to create a loan fund. There's numerous of those all over the country. And then residential, you can create job creation through the construction jobs, and the long-term home building is highly popular right now. So if you wanted to go into your downtown and you wanted to revitalize it through improving housing and putting in senior living or things that attract a new population to your downtown, you could raise capital to potentially do that infrastructure and create those jobs. Early stage capital might be staring at me right now saying, what the heck does this have to do with downtown revitalization? Well, it has, in my opinion, it has everything to do with it. And we created a program 5 years ago called the State Small Business Credit Initiative, where states were given a pot of money to lend to entrepreneurs and micro enterprises. Ohio has a program, it's at ODSA, that you should all take a look at. It's a unique partnership, but really what it's doing is it's unlocking capital to small businesses, entrepreneurs, micro enterprises. And in downtowns, in places where you're trying to attract businesses and industries and attract the next storefront or the next baker or the next restaurant, this kind of money presents a really good option, and it gets the banks involved, and it leverages $10 of private investment for $1 of federal dollars. And so it's really important that you check this stuff out and get engaged in it. Food systems finance. We've seen a huge growth in food finance. If you're in a rural community, this is important because about 4 or 5 years ago, we saw this migration. These rural communities produce these great crops, and they have these freshly, locally created delicacies and fruits and vegetables.
Thank you for calling ESCO, your true nationwide distributor with 4 locations to serve you. We are currently experiencing peak call times, and all of our representatives are serving other customers. We realize your time is valuable. If you'd like the next available representative to call you back, press 1. If you know your party's extension or would like a directory by first name, press 2. If you'd like to speak to the accounting department, press 3. Otherwise,
I'm not really sure what that was. Toby, if you're speaking, we've lost you again. I apologize. We are having continuing technical difficulties, so hopefully Toby will be back with us momentarily.
Hey everybody, are you there? It's Toby again.
Yep, you're good.
All right, sorry everybody, I don't know what that was. All right, food systems finance, is that what you got, Pearl?
Yeah, I have hotels at the top.
Oh, you're one behind me again.
Uh-oh.
We're going to have to do this again sometime and get it right.
Yeah.
What do you got now?
I still got hotels at the top.
Well, let's just hold on a second here, everybody. I don't know how you refresh.
Well, I don't know that there clearly is a way to refresh, but we could try what we did last time and switch to me and then back to you.
Yeah, I'm being told by my folks that our internet is down here, so I'm on my cell phone now. So why don't we do this? But why don't you get it up, and I'll just tell you next slide, and we'll make sure we're on the same slides together.
All right, I can do that.
Hopefully everybody can see what you're seeing.
All right, is that the right slide? Can you see it?
Well, I can't see it. So
Oh, yes, you're correct. Sorry. So early stage capital finance is where you want to be?
Nope, food systems, the next one.
Okay, that is where we are.
All right. So anyway, we've been seeing this disconnect between these rural communities, these small communities, shipping all of their great food products to the urban cities. And what we've been trying to encourage communities to do is to think a little more strategically about that. Why not put food systems in place in your community to encourage the urban places to come there? So there's all sorts of models, from farm to table, grocery stores, urban agriculture, the connection between health and eating, and ways that you can support this. And rural communities that have a great farming and agriculture history could consider opening a farmer's market or a co-op in their community, or a downtown artisan shop based on food and health. And so there's all sorts of structures out there, like first-time farmer financing, USDA business and industry loans. Chase and Goldman Sachs just combined to create an urban foods initiative, and it's co-lending along with CDFIs. So they're working with CDFIs to invest in urban food initiatives. And while that might not necessarily matter to the small places, urban areas that are trying to revitalize and create food hubs, it's a good opportunity. And then TIF and special assessment, again, to address urban food items. Next slide, Pearl Jean, it should say types of projects.
Yep, you're good.
All right. There's a couple of things like the Michigan Good Food Fund, the Colorado Fresh Food Financing Fund, the North Dakota First Time Farmer Program. I don't have tons of information on these. These are all on our website, though, if you want to learn. But these are examples of programs that have been launched just in the last 2 or 3 years where we're talking about food finance. All right, next slide. Should say clean energy.
Yep.
What does clean energy have to do with downtown revitalization? Well, there's a big shift right now in development finance to help support these models. And in downtowns, one of the things you want to do is be more attractive. And how do you be more attractive? You be more efficient. Building efficiency, EE, energy efficiency, renewable energies, clean energies, all these taglines, green energy, are ways for you to look at bringing different sources of capital to your projects that might help make your space more, your development more attractive to investors. Toledo is issuing bonds through their bond and loan program. In New Jersey, bonds were issued to support government energy savings. So maybe your downtown has a number of government facilities. You could issue bonds to help put in renewable energy, clean energy, strengthening the value of their properties and saving them money and allowing them to maybe use some of their savings to invest in what you're doing in the community. Down in Florida, they have a solar energy loan fund program, which is energy efficiency and renewable energy for homes and commercial districts. Again, you're trying to get these old buildings or these disinvestment areas to get capital into them, one way to make them stronger is to make them efficient and to be able to attract businesses that can say, man, I'm in a really efficient building that gives me savings. And then what's cool about the program down in Florida was they have virtually no defaults, which means people pay their loans. And then secondly, they were able to raise capital through a CRA investment from banks. And all of us have that ability as finance agencies to raise capital. And then property assessed clean energy. Over 30 states now have the ability to do property assessed clean energy. This is basically where you assess a fee or so on your properties to be able to do energy lending. And so, Pearl, next slide.
You're good.
The last couple things, and this is really exciting and it's happening right now, how are you engaging your foundations? This is called blended capital, and CDFA and Harvard and the Carnegie Foundation are on a couple-year-long partnership to explore what we call blended capital. How can foundations invest in what you're trying to do in your communities as investors, not as grants, not as hand-me-downs or handouts, but as investors? And have you ever approached your foundations as being an investor? Could they invest in your buildings, in your structures? Could they provide you a couple $100,000 to support a letter of credit on a bond issuance for revitalizing your downtown? Could they be your backstop special assessment for your projects? And what can you do in this space, and what have you done to engage them? Not on the grant making. They don't want to talk about grant making with you about this. They want to talk about impact investing. And there's all sorts of really neat stuff they can be doing. And we're spending the next couple of years, and this is a tool that we know is emerging. Next slide.
Good.
All right. So what are the 5 key components to finance? And I think this is my last slide before we do questions. Define projects. If I could say it once and say it a million times, you need to define your projects. Lots and lots of communities come to me and they say, oh, we're going to revitalize our downtown, or we're going to do this this redevelopment project, and it's this and this, and it could be this, and it might include this, and we've also got this involved. None of that means anything to me, and it doesn't mean anything to investors until you've gotten it written down. A project's not a project until it's on paper. It needs to be 1 or 2 pages and clearly defined. What are you trying to achieve? How much is it going to cost? And if you can't clearly articulate that vision, that defined vision, you're never going to get interest from private sector investors. And with these projects, they're particularly hard if you don't have a defined project and defined vision. Sources and uses. Find the revenues. What are the sources of revenues? There are all sorts of sources of revenues outside of taxes. There's fees, there's special assessment, there's parking vouchers, there's rentals, there's leases. There's all sorts of types of revenues that you could be using to support your development, and then find your expenses. Keep it simple, sources and uses. I was just in Alaska last week, and I was speaking at an event for the state on energy efficiency financing, and I was giving very similar remarks to this. And then we vetted 3 projects at the end for communities that had projects. All 3 of them presented wonderful projects. None of them bothered to give us the sources of revenues. They only gave us the uses. Oh, this project's going to cost $10 million. Oh, this project's going to cost $300,000. Oh, this project's going to cost $600,000. Well, where's your revenues? How are you going to pay it back? Identify those early and often. Preference. Right now, rural development is a pretty preferred investment class. I don't want to hear anything about rural communities not being of interest to lenders. I disagree 100%. We have a wonderful relationship with a group called CoBank, which does the bulk of the rural investment lending for infrastructure in the U.S. They'd love to hear your project as long as it's a project. Leverage. Find small amounts of funding and financing to leverage bigger amounts. Look where you might not think to look. State, local, federal, private sector, foundations, energy sector, brownfield space, anywhere. Find that small nugget of money to leverage the big money. And then complex. Today's financing is incredibly complex. You're going to have to expect multiple sources of funding or financing to be part of your deal. The days of the vanilla, as we like to call it, transactions are over. And you can't just issue TIF bonds and do a TIF district. It doesn't work that way anymore. The credit quality is not there, so you've got to find other support. And so it's going to be complex. If you follow some of these keys, I think you'll be able to get through it. And so with that, I will turn it over to Pearl for questions. You can go to the next slide, Pearl.
All right. All right, so since you probably can't see this screen, Toby, I can read off any questions that come in. I have one or two, but if anybody wants to ask a question, now's the time to write it in the question pane. We'll give you a couple minutes. So I have one question from Christy Thomas. Did you say we will have access to a resource that lists the federal state tools or something along those lines?
I don't think I said you have access to it, but if you go to CDFA.net, we have something called the Federal Financing Clearinghouse, which is online, and it has about, right now it has about 150 active programs in it out of the 170 that we know of, and it has program descriptions of all of those. I will forewarn you, you have to be a member of CDFA to get access to that, but it is a very valuable and awesome resource that many people use at CDFA.
All right. If anybody else has a question, type it now. We'll give you just a couple more minutes. Most of the questions, unfortunately, Toby, are about us losing audio, so I'll have to. All right, we'll have to wait a second. I don't see any more.
No problem.
All right, I'll give them just a minute. Okay. I've got one from Nisa Stump. Can you define complex again?
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'll do one better maybe. I'll go back and explain what simple was and then explain complex. So in the old days, which I'm talking, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we used to do transactions and we would call them, vanilla transaction. We would tip district and the tax revenues would be robust and we could support the bond issuance with that tax revenue plus the debt service reserve plus the backup reserve. We didn't need special assessments. We would just do that as one simple transaction. Here's a $10 million financing, no problem. And today, projects are far more complex. We might still be able to do that TIF deal, but we don't have the projected revenues that we once had. So the revenue estimates are way dialed back. And we don't have the security that we used to have because credit is so tight. So the debt coverage that the banks want is 3 times as much. And so we have to find more creative ways. So we have to credit enhance it. We have to put a special assessment on top of it. Perhaps we do the TIF district, but we also do a revolving loan fund or we get a federal grant. And you look at projects like East Bank Flats in Cleveland, and I think they told me before it has like 16 different financing mechanisms in it. And that's not typical. But you look at, the historic theaters that have been revitalized in Cleveland on the west side, and those projects have 6, 7, 8 financing mechanisms in them. They have tax credits, they have state resources, they have loans, they have grants, they have bonds. And so everything is more complex. Nothing is as simple as it used to be. And that's just sort of a reality of life right now.
All right. We also have a question from Sandra Hall. Can you please address redevelopment loans?
I don't understand the question.
Okay.
It wants to be.
Sandra, if you want to be more specific, I'll move to the next question for now. Toby, do you mind if we hand out this PowerPoint since people were having issues?
Yes.
Okay, then the answer to the question, will the PowerPoint be available, is yes. I can definitely send that out. Elizabeth Murphy wants to know if a developer wanted to initiate this type of discussion with a jurisdiction, would he or she begin with the development officer of the city or town?
Well, yeah, I think if a developer, first off, if you got a developer that, I got my connection back, great. If you have a developer that wants to initiate these discussions, I think that's wonderful. Before that even happens, whatever jurisdictions it's in, whether it's the city, the city of, or if the city has a redevelopment authority that does the work for them, wherever the jurisdiction lies, they should have some policies in place because I think it's important that cities don't be held to whatever the developer says. So
I've been a part of that process a lot, and a developer says, oh, I'm going to come in and I'm going to put $100 million of redevelopment in here. So excited, and then I just need $100 million financing. Well, back the Wayback Machine up. What is the pro forma? Where's the $100 million going? What kind of land access is there? So there's 1,000 questions that have to happen in advance, and there should be no guarantee that the project is going to get TIF or going to get funding or financing from the community. So yes, I think you start with the jurisdiction in control, but with an understanding that there's a framework. Thank you for your interest, developer. We really appreciate this. Let's tear it apart and find out exactly what you're trying to do. And the other thing is, if the developer doesn't want to give that data early on, you don't want to work with that developer. You want to work with developers that want to give you the data, give you access to their books privately. I mean, you don't want to spread it all over the newspapers. You want to be able to look at their performance. And the good developers in this state, like Pizzuti and Casto, the good ones, they, and DDR and Wolstein, they do that. They open their books and they show exactly what's going on.
All right. Richard Lott wants to know, are the USDA grants available for farmers markets in urban areas?
Well, there are some grants available, and there are some loans. And farmers market in urban areas, the answer is no, because USDA can only fund rural communities under $50,000 not adjacent to an urban area, so suburbs aren't eligible. But you could potentially fund a co-op 50 miles out of the city that then supplies to that farmer's market. So there are ways to skin the cat, if you get my point.
All right. And then Sandra clarified she would like you to explain redevelopment loans and how they work. And
I don't fully get the question, but a loan is a loan to me. So I guess I'll present it from the TIF perspective. If you're loaning to redevelopment, it's just like any other loan. The projected payback is principal plus interest, and then that loan fund would also have a coverage ratio. So if making this, I'm completely making these numbers up. If your project is $1 million and your monthly loan payments is $5,000, principal and interest, your bank is going to want you to have coverage ratio of maybe $15,000, or 1.5 times, or $12,500. Make sure that there's never going to be a month where they don't get their payment. And so, redevelopment loan funds work the same as any other loan fund. Now, where this question might be going, and I don't know for sure, is there might have been bonds issued to populate that fund prior to that. And that happens a lot of places. Communities will issue, they'll have 5 projects, and they know those 5 projects are going to be about $20 million total, and they'll issue $20 million of bonds and say, okay, we're going to pay $5,000 a month back, and then they'll finance the projects out of the fund. And those work like revolving loan funds, but they're just coming back. I know I didn't give you a great answer, but I don't necessarily know the difference between. I don't differentiate necessarily.
Okay. And then I think we have maybe one more question from Sharon Grossman. What is the best financing mechanism for restoring a historic theater in a small town?
Jeez, well, you could spend a whole webinar on that simple question right there. So I'll give you my best 2-minute response. What is the best mechanism? Basically, historic tax credits are pretty important, and they're pretty effective, and I think that is a good resource. Unfortunately, I don't think you can do the whole project with just a historic tax credit. I don't think you can get enough out of it to generate a developer interest. So you're looking at pairing that with a new market tax credit. Here in Ohio, we have both state and federal new market tax credit potential. And then I would say after that, you're probably looking at TIF for the infrastructure around it. And keep in mind, if your project is to redevelop an old building, there's a lot of infrastructure that might go around it, like parking, roads, access, street lighting, things that you might be able to, utilities that you might be able to finance. So I'd probably start with historic tax credits, wrap them with new markets, and then maybe even think about TIF as well.
All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. Toby, thank you so much for doing this webinar with us. This has certainly been the most complicated one I've participated in. And I want to thank everybody else for coming to today's webinar. And for future webinars and events, just check heritageohio.org. And everybody have a great day.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.